Your research is showing growing optimism that China's CO2 emissions have already peaked or they'll peak next year in 2025. Now, that's good news, but you've also found that the country's not on track to reach its CO2 targets in line with the Paris Agreement. Can you just explain this? How is this possible?
Even though that the carbon emissions is peaking in China or close to peaking in China, that coal consumption is still the major energy source in the country. And right now, coal makes up more than half of the country's total energy consumption. And since the COVID pandemic, its growth has sped up significantly. If you look at the chart, you will see that to meet Paris Agreement targets, China's coal consumption would need to have started declining from 2020 in all major scenarios. But what's actually happened is that coal consumption surged in 2021 and again in 2023, well above the average growth rates that we saw before the pandemic, let alone declining. Thanks to the rapid clean energy development, most of China's energy demand growth this year is expected to be met by non-fossil fuel sources. That's why we won't see a big emission increase this year.
China's invested more in renewable energy sources than any other country in the world. What does it need to do to speed up its energy transition?
Yes, as you mentioned, that China has made incredible strides in renewable energy with record-breaking investments and installations in solar and wind power. But at the same time, however, the country's energy consumption is also accelerating, and China is deploying renewables as well as fossil fuels at the same time. So this makes it more of an energy addition rather than a true energy transition. To speed up the transition, I think China needs to take some bold actions. This means first need to control the energy consumption growth in order to shift the economy to a more energy efficient pathways and also to loosening its reliance on the long-term coal contracts. It also needs to make the grid more flexible so that renewables can play a bigger role. And I think just as importantly, that setting clear and achievable targets for cutting coal consumption and the CO2 emissions would also provide a strong signal and a clear roadmap for the change.
At the COP29 summit, we've just seen developed countries pledge 300 billion US dollars in climate financing. Despite China being the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, it's not one of those contributing countries. What is China doing to support global efforts to tackle the climate crisis?
In the recent COP29, there's been lots of discussion about how much China should contribute financially. But I believe that the most important thing China can do that is to tackle the global climate crisis, is to focus on reducing its own emissions. China is the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter, and also it is the main driver of the emission growth over the past 20 years. So what China does in the next few decades will be absolutely critical in the global fighting against climate change. That's why it's so important for China to take the next step with more ambitious emission reduction targets.